They came from mental institutions and insane asylums, and they were dumped into our country. They're gang members. We're getting them out at numbers that nobody can actually believe. And every single country is taking those people back. They said they would never take them back, and they're all taking them back, and they're taking them back very gladly. And I recently signed an executive order combating the vile wave of anti-Semitism that we've seen in the aftermath of the October 7th attacks. Together, America and Israel will renew the optimism that shined so brightly just 4 years ago. It was really a bright, beautiful light. We will restore calm and stability to the region and expand prosperity, opportunity, and hope to our nations and for all people of the Middle East, including the Arab and Muslim nations. Very important. We want the Arab and Muslim nations to have peace and have tranquility and have great lives. I'd like to now invite Prime Minister Netanyahu to say a few words, and we'll take some questions afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm honored that you invited me to be the first foreign leader to visit the White House in your second term. This is a testament to your friendship and support for the Jewish state and the Jewish people. I've said this before. I'll say it again. You are the greatest friend Israel has ever had in the White House. And that's why the people of Israel have such enormous respect for you. In your first term, you recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital. You moved the American embassy there. You recognized Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights. You withdrew from the disastrous Iran nuclear deal. I remember we spoke about it. You said, this is the worst deal I've ever seen. I'm elected. I'm walking out of it. That's exactly what you did. And I think it speaks loudly for just common sense, just looking at things and seeing them as they are. And of course, you also brokered the groundbreaking Abraham Accords in which Israel made peace with 4 Arab states. We did this in 4 months. Nothing happened for a quarter of a century, but in 4 months, we were able, working together under your leadership, to have 4 historic peace accords. And now in the first days of your second term, you picked up right where you left off. Your leadership helped bring our hostages home, among them American citizens. You freed up munitions that have been withheld from Israel. They had been withheld from Israel in the midst of a 7-front war for our existence. And you just freed it. You ended unjust sanctions against law-abiding Israeli citizens. You boldly confronted the scourge of anti-Semitism. You stopped funding, as you just said, international organizations like UNRWA that support and fund terrorists. And today, you renewed the maximum pressure campaign against Iran. Ladies and gentlemen, all this in just 2 weeks. Can we imagine where we'll be in 4 years? I can. I know you can, Mr. President. For our part, we in Israel have been pretty busy too. Since the horrendous October 7th attack, we've been fighting our common enemies and changing the face of the Middle East. On that infamous day, Hamas monsters savagely murdered 1,200 innocent people, including more than 40 Americans. They beheaded men, they raped women, they burnt babies alive, and they took 251 people hostage to the dungeons of Gaza. And after this worst attack on Jews since the Holocaust, Iran and its henchmen in the Middle East were absolutely ecstatic. Haniya praised the massacre. Sinwar said that Israel was finished. Nasrallah boasted that Israel was, here's what he said, as feeble as a spider's web. Well, Mr. President, Haniya is gone. Sinwar is gone. Nasrallah is gone. We've devastated Hamas. We decimated Hezbollah. We destroyed Assad's remaining armaments. And we crippled Iran's air defenses. And in doing this, we've defeated some of America's worst enemies. We took out terrorists who were wanted for decades for shedding rivers of American blood, including the blood of 241 Marines murdered in Beirut. We accomplished all this with the indomitable spirit of our people and the boundless courage of our soldiers. The Bible says that the people of Israel shall rise like lions, and boy did we rise. Today, the roar of the Lion of Judah is heard loudly throughout the Middle East. Israel has never been stronger, and the Iran terror axis has never been weaker. But as we discussed, Mr. President, to secure our future and bring peace to our region, we have to finish the job. In Gaza, Israel has three goals: destroy Hamas's military and governing capabilities, secure the release of all of our hostages, and ensure that Gaza never again poses a threat to Israel. I believe, Mr. President, that your willingness to puncture conventional thinking that has failed time and time and time again, your willingness to think outside the box with fresh ideas will help us achieve all these goals. And I've seen you do this many times. You cut to the chase. You see things others refuse to see. You say things others refuse to say. And after the jaws drop, people scratch their heads and they say, you know, he's right. And this is the kind of thinking that enabled us to bring the Abraham Accords. This is the kind of thinking that will reshape the Middle East and bring peace. We also see eye to eye on Iran. That's the same Iran that tried to kill us both. They tried to kill you, Mr. President. They tried through their proxies to kill me. We're both committed to rolling back Iran's aggression in the region and ensuring that Iran never develops a nuclear weapon. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, Israel will end the war by winning the war. Israel's victory will be America's victory. We will not only win the war, working together, we will win the peace. With your leadership, Mr. President, and our partnership, I believe that we will forge a brilliant future for our region and bring our great alliance to even greater heights. Thank you.
Thank you very much, baby. Very nice. Thank you. And J.D. Vance, everybody. J.D., please, Vice President, stand up. He's been doing a good job. He's been working very hard on all things, but this in particular. We'll take some questions, please. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead, please. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. President, can a normalization deal with Saudi Arabia be achieved without the acknowledgement of a Palestinian state? That question for you too, Mr. Prime Minister. And Mr. President, given what you've said about Gaza, did the U.S. send troops to help secure the security vacuum?
So Saudi Arabia is going to be very helpful, and they have been very helpful. They want peace in the Middle East. It's very simple. We know their leader and their leaders very well. They're wonderful people, and they want peace in the Middle East. As far as Gaza is concerned, we'll do what is necessary. If it's necessary, we'll do that. We're going to take over that peace, and we're going to develop it, create thousands and thousands of jobs, and it'll be something that the entire Middle East can be very proud of. But everybody feels that continuing the same process that's gone on forever, over and over again, and then it starts, and then the killing starts, and all of the other problems start, and you end up in the same place, and we don't want to see that happen. So by the United States, with its stability and strength, owning it, especially the strength that we're developing and developed over the last fairly short period of time, I would say really since the election, I think we'll be a keeper of something that is very, very strong, very powerful, and very, very good for the area, not just for Israel, for the entire Middle East. Very important. And we'll again, have thousands of jobs, and there'll be jobs for everyone, not for a specific group of people, but for everybody. Okay, please.
I think peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia is not only feasible, I think it's going to happen. I think if we had another half a year in your first term, it would have already happened.
True. Many more, I agree, many more nations.
I think you can't prejudge and pre-guess how we'll achieve it, but I'm committed to achieving it. I know the president is committed to achieving it, and I think the Saudi leadership is interested to achieve it. So we'll give it a good shot, and I think we'll succeed.
Yeah, please go ahead.
First of all, President Trump, did you hear from Prime Minister Netanyahu at your meeting guarantees that ceasefire will go including phase 2? And Prime Minister Netanyahu questioned you, why are you refusing to set up a national commission to investigate failures of process?
Well, I can't tell you whether or not the ceasefire will hold. We've done, I think, a very masterful job. We weren't helped very much by the Biden administration, I can tell you that. But we've gotten quite a few hostages out. We're going to get more out. But we're dealing with very complex people. And we are going to see whether or not it holds. We certainly want to have more come out. They've come out damaged in many ways, very damaged people. But they're going to get better, and they're going to be strong, and they're going to have a good life. And we hope to get as many as possible out. Whether or not it holds, I don't know. We hope it holds. We hope it holds.
I think that at the appropriate time, which I think will enable us to really investigate what happens, what were the causes of the failures, by an independent commission that will be accepted by the majority of the people. We don't want it accepted by one half of the people and not the other. I think we should have it, and we should find out exactly what happened. I'm insisting on it. And believe me, it'll surprise a lot of people when it happens.
Kelly, go ahead.
You are outlining something that is really quite striking tonight. You are talking about... Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Prime Minister. You are talking tonight about the United States taking over a sovereign territory. What authority would allow you to do that? Are you talking about a permanent occupation there, redevelopment? And Mr. Prime Minister, do you see this idea as a way to expand the boundaries of Israel and to have a longer peace, even though the Israeli people know how important that land is to you and your citizens, just as the space is inherited by the Palestinians as well?
I do see a long-term ownership position, and I see it bringing great stability to that part of the Middle East and maybe the entire Middle East. And everybody I've spoken to, this was not a decision made lightly. Everybody I've spoken to loves the idea of the United States owning that piece of land, developing and creating thousands of jobs with something that will be magnificent in a really magnificent area that nobody would know. Nobody can look because all they see is death and destruction and rubble and demolished buildings falling all over. It's just a terrible sight. I've studied it. I've studied this very closely over a lot of months, and I've seen it from every different angle. And it's a very, very dangerous place to be, and it's only going to get worse. And I think this is an idea that's gotten tremendous, and I'm talking about from the highest level of leadership, gotten tremendous praise. And if the United States can help to bring stability and peace in the Middle East, we'll do that. Bibi?
I mentioned again tonight our three goals. And the third goal is to make sure that Gaza never poses a threat to Israel again. President Trump is taking it to a much higher level. He sees a different future for that piece of land that has been the focus of so much terrorism, so many attacks against us, so many trials and so many tribulations. He has a different idea. And I think it's worth paying attention to this. We're talking about it. He's exploring it with his people, with his staff. I think it's something that could change history. And it's worthwhile really pursuing this avenue.
Yeah, please go ahead. Go ahead. Right.
Question for you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So before rebuilding Gaza again, obviously we'll take all the hostages, and one of them is Jordan Alexander, an American soldier who is alive. How will you be assured that you will take out all the hostages and then rebuild?
We're working very hard to get all the hostages. The word is all, and we are working very hard. So far, it's been moving along fairly rapidly, pretty much on schedule. I'd love to have them all out at one time, but we're taking them out, and tomorrow more are being released, and over the days more, and then we'll go into a phase 2. But we'd like to get all of the hostages, and if we don't, it will just make us somewhat more violent. I will tell you that, because they would have broken their word. Mr. Witkoff and his entire group have been working 24 hours around the clock, and they want them out, and promises have been made to them, and we'll see whether or not those promises will be kept. But we want all the hostages, that's right.
How much time do you think it will take?
Mr. President, do you support Israeli sovereignty in Judea and Samaria, areas which many believe is the biblical homeland of the Jewish people?
Well, we're discussing that with many of your representatives. You're represented very well, and people do like the idea, but we haven't taken a position on it yet. But we will be we'll be making an announcement probably on that very specific topic over the next 4 weeks. Go ahead, please. Please.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. You just said that you think all the Palestinians should be relocated to other countries. Does that mean that you do not support a two-state solution?
It doesn't mean anything about a two-state or one state or any other state. It means that we want to have, we want to give people a chance at life. They have never had a chance at life because the Gaza Strip has been a hellhole for people living there. It's been horrible. Hamas has made it so bad, so dangerous, so unfair to people. And by doing what I'm recommending that we do, it's a very strong recommendation, but it is a strong recommendation. By doing that, we think we're going to bring perhaps great peace to long beyond this area. And I have to stress, this is not for Israel. This is for everybody in the Middle East, Arabs, Muslims. This is for everybody. This would be where they can partake in terms of jobs and living and all of the other benefits. And I think it's very important. It just doesn't work the other way. You know, you can't keep trying. They just has been going along for so many decades, you can't even count. You just can't keep doing. You have to learn from history. You can't keep doing the same mistake over and over again. Gaza is a hellhole right now. It was before the bombing started, frankly. And we're going to give people a chance to live in a beautiful community that's safe and secure. And I think you're going to see a tremendous outflowing of support. I can tell you, I spoke to other leaders of countries in the Middle East, and they love the idea. They say it would really bring stability, and what we need is stability. Yes, sir, please. Go ahead.
Thank you. Are you still committed to imposing sanctions on the ICC despite the move being stalled in the Senate? And please, a question for the Prime Minister as well. The President has been very clear about his desire to achieve a deal with Saudi Arabia. How do you settle this if Israel is required to renew the war against Hamas in the future?
Go ahead, Bibi.
I think everybody understands that just as the President fought and defeated Al-Qaeda and ISIS, that we can't leave Hamas there because Hamas will continue the battle to destroy Israel. They'll do, you know, when in this temporary ceasefire, one of their leaders comes out, you know what he says? We're going to do October 7th again, except we'll do it bigger. So obviously, you can't talk about peace neither with Hamas or in the Middle East if this, toxic, murderous organization is left standing. Any more than you could make peace in Europe after World War II if the Nazi regime was left standing and the Nazi army was left standing. You want a different future? You got to knock out the people who want to destroy you and destroy peace. That's what we're going to do. I think that will also usher in, actually, the peace with Saudi Arabia and with others. And I think there will be others, too.
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
My name is Afghanistan for women as a high expectation from you. Do you have any plan to change Afghanistan situation? Are you able to recognize Taliban? Because I'm an Afghan journalist, Afghan suffered woman. Any comment about Afghanistan? What's your future plan for Afghan people, especially Afghan?
I have a little hard time understanding you. Where are you from? Actually, it's a beautiful voice and a beautiful accent. The only problem is I can't understand a word you're saying. But I just say this, good luck. Live in peace. Go ahead, please. That's okay, yeah, please.
Prime Minister, you said earlier today that it was tough for you to implement these sanctions on Iran, but you did indicate that you were willing to negotiate with them. What would that look like, and are you in conversations with them? And the same for the Prime Minister.
I hated doing it. I want Iran to be peaceful and successful. I hated doing it. I did it once before, and we brought them down to a level where they were unable to give any money. They had to survive themselves, and they had no money. They were essentially broke, and they had no money for, as I said, Hezbollah. They had no money for Hamas. They had no money for any form of terror. The 28, if you call it, the 28 sites of terror, they had no money for any of it. They had to do their own and focus on their own well-being. And I hated to do it then, and I hate to do it just as much now. And I say this, and I say this to Iran, who's listening very intently. I would love to be able to make a great deal, a deal where you can get on with your lives and you'll do wonderfully. You'll do wonderfully. Incredible people, industrious, beautiful, just an unbelievable group of people in Iran. And I know them well, have many friends from Iran and many friends that are Americans from Iran, and they're very proud of Iran. But I hated to do it, just so you understand. And I hope we're going to be able to do something so that it doesn't end up in a very catastrophic situation. I don't want to see that happen. I really want to see peace, and I hope that we're able to do that. They cannot have a nuclear weapon. It's very simple. I'm not putting restrictions. They cannot have one thing. They cannot have a nuclear weapon. And if I think that they will have a nuclear weapon, despite what I just said, I think that's going to be very unfortunate for them. If, on the other hand, they can convince us that they won't, and I hope they can. It's very easy to do. It's actually very easy to do. I think they're going to have an unbelievable future. Yeah, please, sir, go ahead.
You just laid out your plan for Gaza.
Yes.
Can you lay out your plan for Ukraine and also...
For Ukraine?
For Ukraine, yes. You consider yourself a strong leader. You blamed your predecessor for letting Russia to take over Ukraine. Will you demand from Putin to get out of Ukraine, from sovereign territory of Ukraine?
So we're dealing right now on the subject. I don't want to spend a lot of time because we're here for another reason, but we are having very good talks, very constructive talks on Ukraine. And we are talking to the Russians. We're talking to the Ukrainian leadership. It would have never happened. That would have never happened. It should have never happened. I get reports every week. The number of soldiers, mostly soldiers now, the cities have been largely demolished. You talk about a very sad sight to see. We talk Gaza. Well, many of these cities look as bad as Gaza and worse, what's happened to them. And I want to see that end. And I want to see it end for one simple reason, the life of young people being absolutely obliterated on both sides. You probably have 700,000 Ukrainian soldiers dead, 800,000, maybe more Russian soldiers dead. It's very flat land, and the only thing that's going to stop a bullet is a human body, in this case, usually soldiers. And the numbers are staggering when you hear the real numbers in Ukraine, what the numbers are. And this doesn't include the cities that have been demolished and all of the people that were killed. So I want to see it stopped. We're having very good talks, and I think we're going to get it. I think something will be hopefully dramatically. It will rise above everything. You can't let this continue. This is an absolute slaughter that's taking place on the beautiful farmlands of Ukraine, and we have to stop it. We can't let this continue. It is a human tragedy, and we're going to try very hard to stop it. Yeah, please, go ahead, sir. Go ahead.
Mr. President, thank you very much. Mr. President, what's your view about Palestinian leader Abbas' role in all the regional changes you want to do? And the question for the Prime Minister, what's your view on President Trump wanting to reach a deal with Iran and not a much more active military stance towards it?
Go ahead, baby. Go ahead.
I think the president just said something that I think is the pivot of everything that we're talking about. He said Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. And we fully agree with that. If this goal can be achieved by a maximum pressure campaign, so be it. But I think the most important thing is to focus on the goal, which the president just did, and I fully agree with it.
Well, I said it, and he said it very well. It's a campaign of pressure to see if we can get something done. He doesn't want to do what some people think will automatically happen because they're very difficult people to deal with, as you know. But if we could solve this problem without warfare, without all of the things that you've been witnessing over the last number of years, it would be, I think it would be a tremendous thing. Go ahead, please.
Do you have any plans to visit Israel soon?
To visit where?
Israel and Gaza.
Oh, well, I love Israel. I will visit there, and I'll visit Gaza, and I'll visit Saudi Arabia, and I'll visit other places all over the Middle East. The Middle East is an incredible place, so vibrant, so it's just one of the really beautiful places, and with great people. And I think a lot of bad leadership has taken place in the Middle East that's allowed this to happen. It's just terrible. And that includes on the American side, by the way. We should have never gone in there a long time ago, spent trillions of dollars and created so much death. So that includes Americans. But, yeah, I'll be visiting a lot of different places in the Middle East. I've been invited everywhere, but I will be visiting some, yeah. Okay. Let's go. Caitlin, go ahead. Caitlin.
Thank you so much, President Trump.
Caitlin, go ahead.
On what you were saying there.
Say it. Go ahead, please.
Just to follow up on what you were saying about the Gazans leaving Gaza, going to other countries. One, where exactly are you suggesting that they should go? And two, are you saying they should return after it's rebuilt? And if not, who do you envision living there?
I envision world people living there, the world's people. I think you'll make that into an international, unbelievable place. I think the potential in the Gaza Strip is unbelievable. And I think the entire world, representatives from all over the world will be there, and they'll live there. Palestinians also. Palestinians will live there. Many people will live there. But they've tried the other, and they've tried it for decades and decades and decades. It's not going to work. It didn't work. It will never work. And you have to learn from history. History has... you just can't let it keep repeating itself. We have an opportunity to do something that could be phenomenal. And I don't want to be cute. I don't want to be a wise guy, but the Riviera of the Middle East, this could be something that could be so bad. This could be so magnificent. But more importantly than that is the people that have been absolutely destroyed that live there now can live in peace in a much better situation because they're living in hell. And those people will now be able to live in peace. We'll make sure that it's done world class. It'll be wonderful for the people. Palestinians mostly we're talking about. And I have a feeling that despite them saying no, I have a feeling that the king in Jordan and that the general president, but that the general in Egypt will open their hearts and will give us the kind of land that we need to get this done. And people can live in harmony and in peace. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
President Donald Trump, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu wrapping up a press conference at the White House. And sufficing to say, in terms of significance of a presidential press conference, it would be hard to have one in history in which more has been changed about U.S. policy and about how the United States looks at the world than what just occurred over the past 40 minutes. President Trump turning 50 years of foreign policy on its head and saying the United States will take over the Gaza Strip. In his words, we will own it, saying that Palestinians would be allowed to live there, the people of the world will be allowed to live in Gaza, promising a massive development there. And the 1.8 million people who currently were in Gaza or are in Gaza, whose homes have largely been destroyed, would live in one of 12 countries. He promised that Egypt and Jordan would take Palestinians. He did not say so much what would happen to Palestinians in what is called the West Bank, what the Israelis call Judea and Samaria. But he made the point that the peace process, as has been described over the past 50 years, of Israelis and Palestinians living side by side in what would be called a two-state solution, as we've often known it, he said it did not work and it will not work, promising some type of bold new American initiative in the Middle East. The other part of this was the Israeli prime minister, who gave an opening remarks in a way unlike really ever seen by a foreign leader towards an American president. You could say it was obsequious. You could say it was glowing. You could say it was beyond friendly. But it is clear that Benjamin Netanyahu has never been happier, at least as an Israeli prime minister, than he was today, saying that President Trump was the greatest friend that Israel has ever had in the White House, went through the list of things that President Trump did in the Middle East during his first term, and then said, thank you, looking forward to what President Trump will do over the next 4 years. This massive announcement today, to the delight of Netanyahu, saying effectively that the United States was going to take the problem of Gaza, which has been an enormous problem for the Israelis, home to Hamas, where the October 7th attacks were launched from. And he was going to take that problem off the hands of Israel, and the United States would deal with it. Here you go.
They instead can occupy all of a beautiful area with homes and safety, and they can live out their lives in peace and harmony instead of having to go back and do it again. The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too.
Our Robert Sherman, inside the press conference, joins us now. Robert, just watching this was watching history in terms of how foreign policy has changed. When you were in the room, were there gasps at some point? Did the Israeli team seem to expect this? Where are we just sort of in how stunned inside the room was?
On a scale of 1 to 10, about as close to a 10 as it could get, Leland. I mean, there has been such a building of anticipation throughout the day as to what exactly would come out of these meetings here, particularly after you heard the president's comments about the Gaza Strip and potentially moving Palestinians out when it came to the rebuilding process. After that moment there, the anticipation was raised, but then to hear the possibility of the United States taking over Gaza, and then when asked directly, could that mean U.S. military involvement? And the door wasn't necessarily shut on that. When the president was asked about it point blank, there were a lot of things that were said here that, frankly, a lot of people didn't even know were potentially on the table. But it is certainly a new basket of perspectives here when it comes to the landscape of the Middle East. But the president has remained clear in wanting to pick up where he left off in his last administration when it came to expanding normalization, talking about Saudi Arabia, talking about the expansions of diplomatic recognition of Israel. It's an ambitious plan, to say the least. And as you pointed out, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu making very clear that he was very all in on everything that the president said here today. Leland?
And Robert, your perspective on this is so important. And for our viewers who remember and those who don't or new to NewsNation, Robert Sherman was on the ground in Israel reporting for the better part of the year, maybe even the past 14 months after the October 7th attacks. And boy, has there been a change in the relationship between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu versus President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu. Real quick, Robert, just in terms of body language, because you watched Netanyahu through his time with President Biden and the frostiness of that relationship. I've really never heard Prime Minister Netanyahu be as, I'm trying to think of the right word, but as complimentary, perhaps, and short of saying that Donald Trump was the second coming of the Messiah, I think, or the coming of the Messiah, I think this is to say that Benjamin Netanyahu feels as though he is now protected by the United States.
I think that's a very astute observation, Leland, because you would watch Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Biden interacting with one another, and you could see both were picking their words very carefully, diplomatically. Here, it was a very open Benjamin Netanyahu, unlike that we've seen before. He seemed very relaxed up here, as if he was standing next to a close friend. And as you pointed out, maybe has a certain degree of protection here. I mean, something to look forward to the future. The Prime Minister has made clear that Hamas cannot control the Gaza Strip. That is their perspective. And they have left the door open to continue the war, to end it on their terms here. I mean, it is certainly a different series of conversations that we heard when compared to conversations being had with the previous president, President Biden, just a couple of weeks ago. Leland?
Right. Robert, continue your reporting. You've got some great sources, I know, within the Prime Minister's team that is on the ground. Let us know what the Israeli reaction is. With that, Sabrina Singh, former Deputy Pentagon Press Secretary and was a spokesperson for Lloyd Austin at the Pentagon during the last administration. Okay. Fair to say that Donald Trump has taken, 50 years of conventional wisdom in the United States and said, we're going to do away with it. Is that what you heard?
I think we saw a lot of things tonight at this press conference, including some undoing of traditional U.S. policies. What that actually means in practical terms, I don't think we know. I mean, if I'm Secretary Pete Hegseth there, or as he said, Secretary Marco Rubio listening in, what does exactly this mean for the State Department, for diplomatic relations, for the U.S. military? And as you know, we're sending military forces to the border. We're sending military forces to Guantanamo Bay. And now you want to potentially send military forces to the Gaza Strip. How does that fit into our larger goals as the Department of Defense? And more importantly, how are you going to do it? How are you logistically going to do this? So I think it's all platitudinal right now until we actually see some policies get presented, and Congress is certainly going to have a say.
What did you make? And I think we can't sort of understate the difference in how Benjamin Netanyahu treats Donald Trump versus Joe Biden. Mm-hmm. What did you make of this sort of immediate willingness to say, hey, I'm bought in on whatever this plan is? What does that mean to the Israelis and to the United States?
Look, I think it remains to be seen. I mean, we're not even 50 days in, 25 days in.
I think it's 13 or 14, but yeah.
Right. So, we're less than a month into this administration. You're seeing a lot of large statements coming out of the White House, not just from Donald Trump, but from his cabinet, what that means in practice and how global leaders respond. I mean, you certainly saw Netanyahu.
Fair enough to say, and I think you got to give Donald Trump his due on this.
Sure.
The Middle East, he changed the Middle East in his first term. The Abraham Accords, peace with Israel and a number of its Arab neighbors. Moved the embassy to Jerusalem, which we were told was going to start a war and all these things. It did not. Iran now seems to be on its heels, not because of the Biden administration's policies, but despite of it. There's, I think, a lot of appetite, especially in the United States, to say the way we've been dealing with the Palestinians for the past 50 years by both Republicans and Democrats hasn't worked. Why not give something new a try?
I mean, you are talking about decades, centuries of history that apply to this region that I think, of course, we can look back at the last 20, 50 years of American presidents' policies. The reality is there's a historical lens that should be applied here. But I think just one thing to push back on that you made, Iran is on its heels. But you have to remember that under President Biden, it was that administration that stood by Israel in two very large-scale attacks from Iran, both in April and in October. It is because of the weapons that we have given Israel that Israel has successfully been able to dismantle Hezbollah and Hamas. I'm not saying the work is done. I think there's certainly room for growth.
Let's look forward here, right?
Uh-huh.
The Palestinians, time and time again, turned down deals to have the two-state solution from Republicans and from Democrats. I mean, Bill Clinton was furious, famously, with Arafat over the deals, as was George W. Bush, furious over the fact that the Palestinians walked away from a deal. Again, does looking at this through a fresh lens, and I would be the first to admit to you, I was sort of slack-jawed hearing what Donald Trump said and proposed, but it's worth a try.
I think a fresh lens is a good idea, but you have to have a fresh lens with the policies and principles that are going to back it up. How are you going to pay for it? You want to take over the Gaza Strip? What does that mean? You're going to put military boots on the ground? How are you going to pay for them? How are you going to set up camps for military service members?
How do you get 1.8 million Gazans who may or may not want to leave the Gaza Strip out of Gaza?
That's a great question.
Who is going to throw Hamas and the remnants of it, which it still has a lot of weapons and a lot of ability, out of Gaza and deal with that?
That's a great question.
Is it the Israelis who do that first, and then the United States comes in? Yeah. Lastly, and I think this is worth pointing out, we're going to talk to Morgan Ortagus, now the Deputy Middle East Envoy, on the other side of the break, but also another issue here. This is Donald Trump, who has promised to end forever wars. Sending U.S. boots on the ground to the Gaza Strip may be the textbook definition of getting ourselves involved in, at least potentially, a complete quagmire. And that is something the Israelis learned, to the point that they had to withdraw from the Gaza Strip. Suffice it to say, on this day, February 4th, you just watched history unfold in real time. Donald Trump has taken 50-plus years of American foreign policy and smashed it, as he has many things over the past 13 days of his second term, and said that he has a different way of looking at things. Certainly for a long time, the idea has been that the Palestinian problem was at the root cause of all the Middle East. Donald Trump says not so much. He's going to enforce his will, for lack of a better term, on the Palestinians, and he thinks the rest of the Arab world will go along with it. How exactly he is going to do that is going to be fascinating to watch. We have an idea about that on the other side of the break.
This is the story of the one who doesn't just see a broken dock. He sees lost revenue, a late night, and work stalled to a halt. Thankfully, he has the experience to handle whatever comes his way and has Grainger on his side, offering access to technical product specialists and the scale to deliver fast, so he can keep his business in gear and always moving forward. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
I do see a long-term ownership position, and I see it bringing great stability to that part of the Middle East and maybe the entire Middle East. And everybody I've spoken to, this was not a decision made lightly. Everybody I've spoken to loves the idea of the United States owning that piece of land, developing and creating thousands of jobs with something that will be magnificent.
Take whatever you thought you knew about the Middle East and whatever you thought U.S. policy towards the Middle East was and throw it out. Because in the past hour, it has all changed. Donald Trump has taken everything about a deal between the Israelis and the Palestinians for a two-state solution, thrown it out, everything that we thought we knew, and said, time to try something different because the past 50 years haven't worked. And to be fair, past 50 years haven't worked because the Palestinians have refused to take any of the deals offered to them. What you just heard from Donald Trump was about the United States taking a long-term ownership position of Gaza. And 1.8 million Palestinians living there would go to other Arab countries. Whether or not they would take them may be something in serious question. Morgan Ortagus, Deputy Middle East Envoy, former spokesperson for the U.S. State Department, with us. There is news on this Tuesday night. Morgan, help me understand, when the president says long-term ownership position of Gaza, what exactly does that mean, and who is going to throw all of Hamas out before the U.S. troops arrive?
Well, I'll answer the second part first. Getting rid of Hamas and making sure that they are unable to govern Gaza and to be in control of Gaza has been a goal of Prime Minister Netanyahu's of Israel since October 7th. And if you listen to the interviews with National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, for example, he's also said, and Rubio, Secretary of State Rubio, have all said that Hamas was not going to be able to stay in power and to govern in Gaza. That was an untenable situation. Listen, we didn't want the Nazis to stay in power. We in the first Trump administration made sure that ISIS no longer had a caliphate, a territorial caliphate. So whenever you seek to destroy your enemy, the whole point at the end of the war is to make sure that that enemy can no longer govern. And in my opinion, I think the Prime Minister and of course now the President and his team we've been very clear about that. As it relates to ownership and how this is all going to work out from a legal perspective, we'll have a lot of clarity for you in the coming days. But I think the point of the press conference tonight is exactly how you started off with your viewers, Leland. President Trump has looked at the past 50 years of war and chaos in the Middle East and has certainly looked, at the past 16 to 20 years in Gaza, which has not been a life that any of us would want for the Palestinian people. I've heard President Trump constantly talk about how he wants dignity and respect for the Palestinian people. And my boss, Steve Witkoff, went to Gaza last week. He was the first American official there in 15 years, and he went there because he wanted to see it firsthand. And as a real estate developer, as someone who knows a thing or two about having to do construction and buildings, he looked at it and reported back to the president that he thought it was basically uninhabitable. So is it prudent? Is it humane to make these people live in squalor, to make them live in conditions where you have unexploded ordnance that could harm children? This is not a situation that we would put our children in, and nor do we want the Gazan people to have to put their own children in this situation.
Okay, a lot there. I'm thinking about much of that 1.8 million population of Gaza support Hamas, and a lot of them have been radicalized by Iran. We've seen reports of somewhere between 30 and 50% at least have decided to rejoin Hamas and replace the fighters. What makes you think that Egypt or Jordan or the United Arab Emirates or Qatar or Saudi Arabia are going to want to take a bunch of terrorist sympathizers?
Well, we'll see where they end up going. I know President Trump and his team are going to reach out to countries around the world. I will say, I've been doing this for a hot minute, as you know, Leland, and I actually lived in Saudi Arabia as the Treasury attaché in 2010 and 11 and was working very closely with the kingdom on counterterrorism issues. And actually, one of the best de-radicalization programs has been in Saudi Arabia. This is something that they have worked on for a very long time. They've been able to take people who have been radicalized and put it through this program. So there is a model. There are places around the Middle East where you could look. But we've said since the beginning since October 7th, Republicans, but now, of course, Bibi Netanyahu has said this as well for the past year and a half, that you not only have to demilitarize Gaza, you have to de-radicalize Gaza. And I don't think putting those people, and I don't think the president thinks that putting those people back in a situation where they are living in a demolition zone is going to be a way to de-radicalize the place or to demilitarize the place. Also, remember, we still don't know. At least we guess that at least 30% of the tunnels in Gaza haven't been discovered yet. So how do you build a new building on top of that when you don't even know what's going on underneath?
Well, that's where the hostages are. That's where Hamas's still weapon stores are. Morgan, thank you very much for hopping out. We know you've got a big night ahead, and we'll check in soon. Thank you.
Sure.
All right. There has been a lot of criticism of President Trump and his policies over the past couple of weeks, that they are more aspirational than they are wins. One place President Trump has gotten an enormous win is in North Carolina, the Western Hills of North Carolina that were forgotten. He promised action. We'll check in on how that's going when we come back. The past couple of weeks, Donald Trump has declared victory on a lot of things, and a lot of those things are more like promises of things that will happen. It's only fair we tell you when Donald Trump gets a real win and completely changes things. It was looking hopeless in western North Carolina after Hurricane Helene. Victims spent months sleeping in tents during freezing temperatures. Trump came about a week ago and promised help would come. It was his first trip as president, his first stop. Things are finally looking up for the people whose lives were destroyed. We sent NewsNation senior correspondent Brian Enton on a NewsNation exclusive hunt into the worst hit parts of Western North Carolina to see what's changed in the past week. Brian?
Yeah, Leland, we've spent the last couple of days here, and a lot has changed. Like you said, politics aside, things are moving and happening here. It's quiet tonight, obviously. It's dark, but all day long we saw the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in these trucks up and down the riverbanks and stream banks for the first time, going in and clearing debris. I spoke with the colonel from the Army Corps. He says ever since President Trump's visit and signing off on the executive order, he's calling it what is a surge of resources. They are surging resources in here from around the country, more trucks, more equipment. The locals are noticing it. We noticed it, and things are really finally starting to move along here, Leland.
Yeah, it's absolutely incredible. Brian is reporting, and we should add, for virtue of those joining us, that Brian speaks from experience because he was the only reporter and we were the only network on the ground after the tragedy, as people were sleeping in RVs and in tents, that Brian was down there with them. Thank you, Brian. We appreciate it. Boy, what has changed in America, in the world in the past hour and a half is truly stunning. President Trump has thrown now 50 years of American foreign policy towards the Middle East out the window. He said the United States is going to take over the Gaza Strip. How exactly they're going to get Hamas out of the Gaza Strip and what U.S. troops will do is a question for the ages, and one Chris Cuomo starts to tackle right now.